So what's the difference between anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and panic disorder? Now, many people use anxiety attacks as a way to describe panic attacks and vice versa. And of course, that's completely understandable because they do have a lot of overlapping symptoms. But it is really important actually to understand the difference because the approach to treatment and recovery is different. And so by understanding that difference, it means you can take the right steps to navigate anxiety and panic in a more practical way that allows you to resolve it more effectively. Hello, it's Andrew Major here, clinical hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. So let's start by looking at what anxiety attacks and panic attacks have in common. Now, they both involve feelings of fear or discomfort that can be completely overwhelming. And that's because your stress response kicks in, that fight or flight response. And you might experience physical symptoms such as a rapid heart rate, chest pains, shortness of breath, dizziness, and even nausea. You might even be experiencing cognitive symptoms like racing thoughts and a sense of detachment from reality. Now, the thing is, both attacks are often triggered by stress and perceived threats, whether they're real or imagined, that evoke a sense of fear or anxiety. They might include social situations or specific phobias, traumatic events, or even the what if or rumination of things that we can't change. So what makes anxiety attacks and panic attacks different? Well, first of all, it's important to point out that anxiety attacks are not a defined mental health disorder. And I say this because the DSM-5, the term anxiety attack is not an official diagnostic category. They don't define it. Anxiety can be defined, of course, as a feeling of unease, such as worry or fear, and that can be mild or severe. Now, we all have, don't we? Everybody has feelings of anxiety at some point in their life, but when those feelings don't go away or they become more severe, you might lose control of your worries. Feelings of anxiety are then more constant, and that can affect your whole life and the things that you can or you can't do. So when we talk about having an anxiety attack, it's actually because of underlying anxiety and stress that's been going on for a while. And so that impacts your ability to cope and think clearly. And anxiety attacks are often made worse in the anticipation of events too, situations. So you might have been under a lot of stress and pressure at work, for example. Maybe you're being asked to do more than you feel you have the resources to deal with. Maybe finances are a source of stress. But the point is that these things and the way that we think and reflect on them build bigger over time and become bigger and bigger. And your internal thoughts go over them and over them. And so it becomes overthinking until you reach breaking point. Now, anxiety attacks are often accompanied by an increased level of cortisol in response to worry. So of course we know that cortisol is that stress hormone, and that's given to us when it's released in response to perceived threats or stressors. And it plays a role in regulating our body's stress response and maintaining overall balance. And these elevated cortisol levels in anxiety attacks contribute to the symptoms such as restlessness, irritability, more worry, fear, and that discomfort. Now, anxiety attacks typically last a few minutes, around 30 minutes. And your body's stress response and physiological factors, along with emotional, cognitive processing, contribute to the duration of that anxiety attack. And factors such as breath control and your individual differences also influence how long that anxiety attack lasts. So it's important to recognize these responses so you can regain control and calm things down. And of course, the easiest, the most simplest way to start doing that in the moment is to focus on deep breathing, to regulate your breathing, to activate your body's relaxation response. Now, a simple process of deep breathing engages your parasympathetic nervous system, and that sends signals to the brain that everything is under control, prompting that parasympathetic nervous system to take over, allowing you to start relaxing and standing down again. So what about panic attacks then? Well, these are defined by the DSM-5. A panic attack is a sudden and intense episode of overwhelming fear or discomfort that happens out of the blue. Now, it can include physical symptoms like a rapid heartbeat and shortness of breath, along with cognitive symptoms such as racing thoughts and a fear of losing control. Panic attacks are typically over and subside within a few minutes too. Now, when I say it happens out of the blue, that means that it's unexpected because there's no obvious cue or trigger when it happens. Although in my experience, it's very common to hear how ongoing anxiety and stress contributes to the panic attack actually happening. Panic attacks can also be expected. So when there's an obvious trigger, such as a place or a situation where panics occurred in the past, for example, or maybe if you have a specific phobia to something like flying, snakes, or even rats, for example. And interestingly, when a panic attack strikes, in contrast to anxiety, it triggers the release of adrenaline and noradrenaline, and those are stress hormones produced in the adrenal glands in response to fear. So that sudden increase in adrenaline heightens your body's physiological responses, such as raising your heart rate, your blood pressure, and respiration rate. And the rush of adrenaline really is linked then to that intense physical sensations we experience during panic, like that racing heart and that shortness of breath and chest pain that you really notice. And if you found this video useful so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button to let me know. So what about panic disorder then? Well, panic disorder is usually diagnosed if you have 2 or more panic attacks, and at least one of those attacks has been followed by 1 or more persistent concerns of having another panic attack. And panic disorder usually includes one of the following symptoms too: derealization, that detachment from yourself, fear of having a heart attack, or fear from hyperventilating and passing out. Now, it's also important to point out that you can experience anxiety and panic at the same time. So for example, sometimes anxiety about a situation can escalate and then result in a panic attack. Now, I often help clients that have had a fear of flying, for example. So they might experience increasing anxiety as their trip to the airport and the flight approaches, and then this heightened anxiety can lead to physical symptoms like a racing heart and shortness of breath. And that can then lead to a sudden intense surge of fear and discomfort, and they begin to have a panic attack. And the thing is, panic attacks reinforce their fear, creating a cycle of anxiety and panic. So how can you stop anxiety and panic attacks happening? Well, the good news is that both anxiety attacks and panic attacks can be treated and resolved. And I believe the start of this, the foundation to overcoming both, is by following some really useful and well-researched techniques. Things that begin with focusing on calming that nervous system down, such as your breath work, deep breathing, muscle relaxation, such as progressive muscle relaxation, physical exercise and so on. This all helps reduce the symptoms of panic and anxiety gradually. Avoiding stimulants like caffeine and alcohol, slowing down and making time all helps reduce internal stress. Now, CBT and hypnotherapy and working with a therapist can also help you reduce anxiety and panic, and that's a really useful way to identify and challenge negative thoughts that contribute to panic. They can help you learn more relaxation techniques to cope with physical symptoms and gradually face triggers in a safe way which addresses underlying beliefs, so you can make positive behavioural changes and gain back control. But if you're having recurring panic attacks, struggling with panic disorder for example, focusing on techniques that avoid or try to stop you having a panic attack could make things worse. And that's because panic is anxiety about your anxiety. So when you try really hard to eliminate or avoid your panic attack, you're actually teaching your brain that your own anxiety is dangerous, and as a result your brain gets really, really good at quickly delivering lots of adrenaline in response to those fearful thoughts or any physical sensations associated with anxiety. And this creates a vicious cycle in your brain, being increasingly on the lookout or even for the smallest sign of anxiety, and then responding to it with an increasingly exaggerated fight or flight response. Now, when we constantly worry and we treat our own anxiety as a threat, we're inadvertently teaching our brain that to feel anxious is dangerous. So to break free from this mistaken belief and the habit of worrying, we need to demonstrate to our brains that we're accepting of our anxiety. If we simply try to calm down and try to avoid panic attacks, this simply makes them come back time and time again. If we constantly worry about anxiety, our brain interprets it as a dangerous signal. Conversely, intentionally refraining from worrying about anxiety sends a message to our brain that anxiety is actually safe. It might be uncomfortable, but ultimately it's not harmful. And to do that, you need to understand how panic attacks develop and what steps you can take to stop them from coming back. And I explain all of that in this video here, so you can go and watch that now, and I look forward to seeing you there.